Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1, The Invitation to Saint Aurelius. The invitation arrived on a cool October morning while Hercule Poirot was enjoying his breakfast at his flat in London. As usual, the table was arranged with the symmetry and order he so adored: boiled eggs set at perfect alignment, toast cut into even rectangles, and the silver teaspoon resting precisely parallel to the plate. His famous moustache, styled to immaculate perfection, quivered only slightly as he opened the envelope with surgical precision. The letter was on refined cream paper bearing the embossed crest of St. Aurelius Academy, a name that stirred memories among London's educational elite. The Academy was well known, even whispered about, as the place where future statesmen, diplomats, and thinkers were forged. It was said that their alumni walked into Parliament as naturally as others walked into cafes. Poirot adjusted his spectacles and read the elegant handwriting, noting at once the urgency behind the refined phrasing. Monsieur Poirot, I am in dire need of the utmost discretion and exceptional insight. Matters of rivalry within our institution have escalated beyond acceptable bounds. Your presence is requested, not for a crime, at least not yet, but for prevention, investigation, and guidance. With deep respect, Dr. Theophilus Carrington, Headmaster, St. Aurelius Academy. Poirot set down the letter thoughtfully. Not for a crime, yet, he murmured. How very curious. He tapped his fingertips together. Rivalries within academic institutions were not unfamiliar to him. He had once remarked that intellectual competition could produce passions as intense as those produced by affairs of the heart. Students competing for scholarships and honors were, in their own way, generals on a battlefield. And where there were battles, there were casualties, if not of the body, then of reputation. Still, for a prestigious headmaster to summon him suggested that the situation had already progressed beyond mere competitions of the pen. Within 3 days, Poirot arrived by train at St. Aurelius, nestled on the outskirts of Oxfordshire. The Academy stood dignified atop a gentle rise, its stone walls ivy-clad, with large windows that reflected the pale autumn sun. A row of chestnut trees lined the central courtyard, their leaves aflame in amber and crimson. Students crossed between buildings at brisk pace, carrying books, papers, and ambitions. A young porter greeted Poirot with formal courtesy and escorted him through the old main building, its corridors smelling of waxed floors and library paper. Portraits of former scholars and headmasters glowered down from the walls, as though judging every arrival. Poirot noted their stern expressions with amusement. Dr. Carrington awaited Poirot in his study, a dark oak-panelled room with a fireplace quietly crackling and an impressive collection of leather-bound volumes. The headmaster was a man of about 60, his beard trimmed neatly, spectacles balanced upon a nose that seemed perpetually burdened by responsibility. Monsieur Poirot, he said, shaking hands warmly, your coming is a blessing. I feared you might decline. With such a courteous invitation. Poirot replied. Jamais. And besides, I am always intrigued where the intellect collides with the emotion. Please, tell me of this problem. Carrington sighed deeply and motioned for Poirot to sit. Our most prestigious honor, something we call the Aurelius Fellowship, is awarded each year to the finest student among the final year scholars. It guarantees entrance to the diplomatic corps, full sponsorship for university, and considerable societal favor. Naturally, competition is fierce. But this year, he hesitated. This year it has become poisonous. He leaned closer. Accusations, anonymous letters, threats, sabotage of academic work. We have not had such unsavory behavior in decades. Whispered rumors reach even the staff rooms. Poirot nodded slowly. Then you fear it may soon escalate to what one calls something less civilized. Yes. I do, Carrington admitted. Our 3 finalists are exceptional, yet each is under strain. Their tutors are unsettled. I worry their rivalry has moved from excellence to desperation. Poirot folded his arms. Tell me of them. Carrington retrieved a blue folder from his desk and opened it. First, he said, Clara Denholm. Brilliant, poised, immensely polished. Languages are her domain. She writes with elegance and argues with precision. Comes from an influential family with expectations as high as the Academy walls. Her only flaw, if one can call it that, is a touch of superiority. Poirot made a soft sound that might have been amusement. Second, Carrington continued, Victor Graves. A mathematical prodigy. Numbers appear to bow before him. He is ambitious, fiercely so. I have never seen a boy work with such calculation. But ambition can isolate a person. And the third? Poirot prompted. Leena Ashcroft. A scholarship student. Her background is modest but her intellect profound. She excels in history and political studies. Many of the staff admire her because she works twice as hard for half the recognition. Poirot's moustache twitched thoughtfully. 3 styles of ambition, the poised, the ruthless, and the diligent. Carrington nodded gravely. Their rivalry has turned the Academy into a battlefield. There was a plagiarism complaint filed by Victor against Clara. Then Clara hinted publicly that Leena receives special favor because of her underdog image. And Leena, poor girl, received an unsigned letter urging her to withdraw from the competition or suffer consequences. Poirot leaned back, fingers pressed together. And the faculty? Divided, Carrington admitted. Some champion Clara, others Victor. Only Professor Harborough has argued steadfastly that the fellowship should be awarded solely on merit. But that stance has earned him no friends among the more political members of staff. Harborough is a man of ethics, perhaps to a fault. Poirot nodded. He knew the type. Idealism sharpened by integrity often made a blade capable of cutting into power structures. Such men rarely navigated ambition without making enemies. Carrington concluded, voice lower now, I brought you not to arbitrate, but to observe. I fear we are approaching catastrophe. If the matter is not contained, someone will be ruined, publicly or otherwise. Poirot rose, smoothing his suit. Very well. Hercule Poirot will observe your academy and your scholars. We will see what grows from the soil of competition, and whether the roots conceal something rotten beneath. He glanced out the mullioned window. Students crossed once more between buildings with crisp determination, unaware, or perhaps keenly aware, of the stakes looming over them. Poirot whispered to himself, where the prize is great, the flaws of human nature become greater still. Chapter 2, A Death in the Library. The atmosphere at St. Aurelius the following day felt charged, as though a thunderstorm were hovering just beyond the clouds, waiting for the signal to break. Hercule Poirot, who believed deeply in the moods of places, sensed the tension long before anyone spoke of it. He spent the early morning touring the grounds with Dr. Carrington. Students were already in class, yet their hurried footsteps and hushed conversations betrayed an underlying unease. Teachers strode purposefully along the corridors, their faces composed, their eyes less so. You see, Carrington murmured, as they passed a row of classrooms, even the air feels different this term. It is not enthusiasm, but strain. Poirot agreed silently. The academy resembled a fine instrument tuned too tightly, one wrong note and the strings might snap. They paused by the door of the upper library, one of the oldest and most dignified rooms in the school. Tall windows flooded the shelves with pale light, and rows of polished tables waited for the serious and the studious. At that moment, However, the library was closed for cleaning, a sign hanging from the brass handle. Professor Harborough spends most mornings here before his lectures, Carrington said, nodding toward the door. He corrects essays, makes notes for debates, and drinks his tea at precisely noon. He is nothing if not consistent. Poirot's attention sharpened subtly at the mention of Harborough. And how does he regard your three rivals? With a mixture of pride and concern, Carrington replied. He respects their abilities but worries that their desire to outdo one another will leave them less generous of spirit. He considers it his duty to keep them intellectually sharp and morally grounded. Poirot's moustache twitched. Ah, a moralist. They often stand directly in the path of those who prefer shortcuts. Carrington made a soft sound that might have been agreement. If you like, you may attend his lunchtime seminar today. He leads a discussion for final year students in the small lecture hall. Poirot inclined his head. With pleasure. I wish to see the young champions of St. Aurelius in their natural habitat. They parted, Carrington returning to administrative affairs, Poirot strolling alone down a quieter corridor. He found a bench near a window overlooking the courtyard and sat, watching life at the Academy unfold. A group of younger students hurried past, carrying armfuls of books. A prefect admonished a boy for running. Two girls argued quietly over a timetable. It was a scene almost pastoral in its routine, yet Poirot noticed a greater intensity whenever final year students appeared. Their steps were brisk, their brows furrowed, their conversations clipped. The fellowship loomed over them like an invisible examiner, marking every action. At 11:45, Poirot rose from his seat and made his way toward the small lecture hall. Students filed in, notebooks in hand, voices low. He took a place discreetly at the back, though his presence was hardly inconspicuous, even in a plain chair. Poirot's impeccable attire and distinctive moustache attracted curious glances. Clara Denholm entered first among the three principal candidates, her posture straight as a ruler. She nodded politely to a few classmates but did not linger in conversation. She selected a seat in the center row, laying out her notebook and pen with careful precision. Her expression suggested calm confidence, though Poirot detected a hint of strain at the corners of her mouth. Victor Graves arrived next. Tall, pale, with sharp features, he carried a stack of papers and a pencil worn down by much use. He dropped into a seat, immediately began flipping through his notes, and glanced repeatedly at the clock. His knee bounced under the desk, a rapid, impatient rhythm. Leena Ashcroft entered last, clutching a modest binder. She took a seat slightly to the side rather than in the center, as if reluctant to place herself too prominently. Yet even from the back, Poirot could see the intelligence in her eyes, the way they flicked to the blackboard, the door, and then to the other candidates with quick assessment. 5 minutes passed. The room settled. Conversations quietened. They waited for Professor Harborough. He did not come. At first, it was a minor oddity. Students exchanged puzzled looks. A few muttered that perhaps he had been delayed by the headmaster. Victor checked his watch again. Clara frowned, annoyed at the disruption of punctuality. Leena tapped her pen on the desk, then stopped, realizing it betrayed her nerves. 10 minutes passed. A low murmur rolled through the hall like a distant tide. At last, a younger lecturer appeared in the doorway, his face wary. "Everyone, I'm afraid Professor Harborough has been delayed. You are dismissed for now. Please return to your usual study periods." The students began to gather their things, irritated or relieved depending on their temperament. Poirot, however, rose with deliberate slowness. There was something in the young lecturer's tone that spoke not of a minor inconvenience but of concealed alarm. He stepped toward the door and addressed the man quietly. "Monsieur, you say the professor is delayed. Might one ask, as a guest of the headmaster, whether assistance is required?" The lecturer hesitated. I'm not really permitted to say. At that moment, another figure appeared at the far end of the corridor, Inspector Elliot Maybury, dressed in a plain suit and carrying the air of a man called somewhere before he had finished his own morning tea. Beside him walked Dr. Carrington, looking more severe than before. Poirot needed no announcement. His keen grey-green eyes registered the set of the inspector's jaw, the tightness around Carrington's eyes. He stepped forward, his voice calm and firm. "Dr. Carrington. Something has occurred." Carrington swallowed. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot. I am afraid we did not summon you too early after all. There has been a tragedy." Inspector Maybury introduced himself briskly. "Elliot Maybury, Thames Valley Police. I was informed you were on the premises, Monsieur Poirot. To be frank, your presence is extremely timely." "Then it seems the little grey cells of fate have arranged matters with efficiency," Poirot replied. "What has happened?" Carrington answered in a low voice. "Professor Harborough has been found in the upper library. The librarian discovered him a short while ago. He appears to have collapsed at his desk." "Collapsed," Poirot repeated softly. "And the school doctor?" "Already examined him," Maybury said. "It looks like a sudden seizure from the outside, but the doctor suspects something less natural. We will know more when the formal examination is carried out. For now, we are treating it as suspicious." Poirot nodded once. "Then, if you please, let us go to the library." They walked together, the corridor seeming longer now, the academy no longer a bastion of learning but a house containing a secret. As they approached the upper library, Poirot noticed that the door which had earlier borne a simple cleaning sign was now guarded by a constable. A sense of gravity hung over the landing. Inside, the library was still and dim. Dust motes drifted lazily in the shafts of light that fell from the high windows. At one of the large central desks sat Professor Julian Harborough, motionless. His body leaned forward slightly, one hand on the surface as though he had tried to steady himself. His spectacles were crooked on his nose. A pen lay on the floor beside him, its ink pooling like a small shadow. On the desk sat an open notebook, several essays, a half-full teacup, and an envelope bearing the words in Harborough's careful hand, "Aurelius Fellowship, Preliminary Evaluation." Poirot approached slowly, his gaze taking in every detail, the angle of the professor's head, the position of the cup, the arrangement of papers. Inspector Maybury spoke quietly. "The doctor believes he died within the last hour. There are signs of convulsion in the hands. He suspects a fast-acting poison, possibly something slipped into the tea or sugar." Poirot glanced at the teacup, then at the small sugar bowl and milk jug placed neatly beside it. The spoon lay on the saucer, stained by the last stir. "The tea," Poirot murmured. "Always, in England, the drama may be found in the teacup." Dr. Carrington sank into a nearby chair, shaking his head. "Julian Harborough was one of our finest. And now, here, of all places." Poirot's eyes travelled to the envelope labelled Aurelius Fellowship. He did not touch it yet, but the significance was clear. "Tell me," he said softly, "who knew Professor Harborough would be working here this morning?" "Nearly everyone," Carrington replied. "He keeps a regular routine. The students know they can find him here before his seminars. Many of them come to consult him. Then we have a stage upon which anyone might step," Poirot remarked. "An accessible room, a predictable habit, and a man whose decision could alter the futures of several ambitious young people." His gaze sharpened. "And when such futures hang by a thread, Monsieur le Directeur, there is always someone tempted to cut it." Outside, the muted bell of the school rang for the midday change of classes, unaware, or perhaps indifferent, to the fact that one of its most respected voices had been silenced. The competition for the Aurelius Fellowship had drawn first blood. Chapter 3: Competing Alibis. The news of Professor Harbour's death spread through the Academy with astonishing speed. Rumours rarely walked at St. Aurelius, they sprinted. Within an hour, whispers filled corridors, common rooms, stairwells, and even the courtyard where younger pupils gathered in anxious clusters. Students spoke in low voices, as though the walls themselves might carry their words to the ears of authority. Hercule Poirot understood instinctively that the first 24 hours were paramount. Not merely for evidence, but for understanding psychology, how people behaved before they had time to measure their reactions, rehearse their grief, or polish their innocence. Inspector Mayberry had already begun the formal process of cataloguing physical evidence, but it was Poirot who focused on the subtler and infinitely more delicate matter of human behavior. By early afternoon, Dr. Carrington had arranged for the 3 fellowship candidates, Clara Denholm, Victor Graves, and Leena Ashcroft, to speak individually with Poirot and the inspector in one of the smaller conference rooms adjacent to the headmaster's office. The room was plain but comfortable, with 2 tall windows overlooking the courtyard. A tea service had been set on a sideboard, though none of the occupants touched it. Poirot sat at the centre of the long table, Inspector Mayberry at his side, notebook in hand. Dr. Carrington stood by the window, arms folded, more nervous than his rugged frame suggested. A constable brought in the first student, Clara Denholm. Clara's account. Clara entered with brisk steps, chin held high. Her dark hair was pinned neatly, and her school uniform impeccable. She did not appear frightened, rather, she looked inconvenienced. Poirot gestured politely. "Please sit, mademoiselle. We ask only for clarity of your morning. You were expected at Professor Harbour's seminar today." "Yes," Clara replied, settling in her chair. "I was present in the lecture hall until we were dismissed. It was quite confusing, I must say." "And before the seminar?" Poirot asked gently. Clara took a small breath. "I was in advanced French with Madame Rousseau from 11 to 12. Inspector Mayberry said, Madame Rousseau confirms that you were in her class, though you stepped out for a moment." Clara's eyes flickered with annoyance. "Yes. I went to retrieve a dictionary from the corridor shelf." "Hardly a matter of suspicion." Poirot tilted his head. "We do not imply suspicion, merely clarify opportunities. The upper library is 2 corridors from that shelf." Clara's lips pressed together. A pause stretched thin before she replied, "Are you asking if I walked to the library?" "I did not. I retrieved the dictionary and returned to class." "Only that?" Poirot leaned forward slightly. "And how did you regard Professor Harbour?" Clara seemed taken aback. "He was an excellent teacher. Challenging. Fair." "Fair," Poirot repeated softly. "Not kind." "Kindness is unnecessary in academia," Clara said crisply. "Standards matter more." Poirot exchanged a brief glance with Mayberry. Clara stood perfectly still, poised, composed, but Poirot noted the micro-tension at her jawline, the quickened blink when Harbour's name was mentioned, and the folded hands that betrayed just a touch of tremor. As Clara left the room, Poirot whispered, "Her alibi is acceptable. Yet the ambition, it burns. And where it burns, it consumes." Dr. Carrington inhaled deeply. "Clara has always been forthright." "Forthright is not the word I would choose," Poirot mused. "But we continue." Victor Graves. Victor entered next, clutching books and papers as though they served as armor. His posture was tense, shoulders tight, eyes watchful. He sat before they invited him to. Inspector Mayberry began, "Victor, where were you between 11 and noon today?" "In the maths wing," Victor replied swiftly. "I was preparing for the analysis exam." "And you left the room at some point?" Poirot asked. "Yes. Around 11:30. Only for a moment. I needed to clear my head." I was stuck on a proof. Clearing the head, Poirot echoed thoughtfully. Often done by walking, yes. Victor nodded. Yes. Down the corridor and back. Did you cross into the library wing? No, Victor said at once. Too quickly, perhaps. Poirot did not challenge him. Instead he shifted slightly. Tell me of Professor Harborough. Did he favor you for the fellowship? Victor's jaw tightened. He favored no one. That was his way. And this neutrality displeased you. Victor's fingers curled around the edge of his papers. It would have been simpler if he had given support. Other faculty already backed Clara. Someone needed to counterbalance that. Poirot studied him. Victor was not the type to pout. He was the type to calculate, and when calculation met frustration, it produced a cold kind of desperation. When Victor departed, Maybury leaned toward Poirot. He's nervous. Poirot shook his head gently. None, Inspector. Not nervous, afraid. There is a difference. Nervousness is momentary. Fear lingers like smoke. Leena Ashcroft. Leena entered last. She did not stride or rush, but moved with the careful softness of someone accustomed to being underestimated. She sat, placed her binder on her lap, and waited. Poirot smiled kindly. Mademoiselle, we will ask the same questions as the others. Where were you this morning? Leena spoke clearly, though quietly. In the student common room after history review. I was preparing notes for the diplomacy debate. Several students were there. Maybury checked his notes. We've spoken to 3 who confirm that. You stepped out briefly. Yes. To get water from the corridor cooler. Only a minute. Poirot nodded, his eyes attentive. Tell me about Professor Harborough. A pause, longer than expected. Leena folded her hands in her lap. He believed in fairness, she said simply. That meant a great deal to me. You mean because you do not have the advantages of Clara or Victor? Leena blinked. Surprise replaced restraint. Yes. Exactly that. Poirot continued gently, and the fellowship, you want it. Another pause, but this one filled with quiet weight. I need it. Not want. Not desire. Need. Poirot made no comment, but his mind recorded the distinction with great care. Need created motive just as surely as anger or envy. When Leena left the room, silence lingered. Finally, Dr. Carrington spoke, rubbing his temples. They all had chances to reach the library. All had reasons. All had pressures. Harborough's death affects them each differently, but intensely. Poirot stood and moved toward the window, hands behind his back. Outside, students flowed across the courtyard again. Life resumed. Yet beneath that surface was a current of anxiety, winding like a subterranean river. At last, Poirot turned, face solemn. Ambition, Inspector, is a curious poison. When one ingests too much, it clouds judgment. When mixed with fear, it becomes lethal. Maybury asked, so which of them do you suspect? Poirot shook his head. At this moment? I suspect them all. Chapter 4, The Ghost of Plagiarism. The remainder of the afternoon was consumed by a strange mixture of official procedure and unofficial anxiety. While Inspector Maybury supervised constables collecting items from the upper library, Dr. Carrington attempted to keep the academy functioning, as though maintaining routine might stave off hysteria. Students attended classes, though no one truly learned anything, they merely occupied their desks like actors waiting for lines to be spoken. Poirot, meanwhile, walked the grounds in contemplation. St. Aurelius, for all its prestige and orderliness, was a hive of petty resentments and grand ambitions. The atmosphere felt not unlike that of a card game in which each player believed himself on the verge of victory, unaware someone had already sabotaged the deck. It was during his stroll that Madame Rousseau intercepted him. She approached briskly, her French elegance undiminished by the grief of the day. Her dark eyes flashed with urgency as she spoke. "Monsieur Poirot, may I speak with you?" "It concerns Mademoiselle Denholm." Poirot inclined his head. "But of course." They stepped into one of the glass-walled study alcoves that overlooked the gardens, affording both privacy and light. Madame Rousseau clasped her hands. "I hesitated to mention this to Dr. Carrington, for fear of causing further scandal. But you are here for the truth, yes? And the truth is a stubborn thing." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "Madam, you intrigue me," she continued, lowering her voice. 3 weeks ago, Clara submitted a translation assignment in my class, one that was exceptionally well done. Too well. The nuance was beyond what even my advanced students achieve. I suspected assistance. Poirot understood at once. "You imply plagiarism." "None. Not precisely. Rather, that someone translated it for her. A private tutor perhaps. Yet when I questioned her, she became defensive. Then cold. She insisted her work was original." Poirot tapped a finger lightly against his cuff. "And this work contributes to the fellowship?" "Yes. It forms part of her language evaluation. Without it, Victor's mathematical advantage would become overwhelming." Poirot considered the implications. "You did not report this." Madame Rousseau exhaled. "I attempted to. But when I raised the matter with another examiner, I was told that Clara's family has influence. Funding for a new language wing, for example." "Ah," Poirot murmured. "So the Academy itself is not immune to the politics of advancement. How very human." Madame Rousseau closed her eyes. "I admit I am ashamed. I allowed myself to be persuaded to let the matter rest, as they say. And now Harborough," she stopped, swallowing. "Perhaps if we had insisted on an investigation then, this might not have happened." Poirot placed a gentle hand over hers. "Do not take responsibility for that which was beyond your sight. The path between plagiarism and murder is not an obvious one." But internally, Poirot filed the detail neatly within his mind. Clara's immaculate poise now carried the scent of desperation. Ambition already compromised by questionable ethics was fertile ground for darker acts. Still, he reminded himself, motive alone did not convict. After Madame Rousseau departed, Poirot continued his inquiries. In the late afternoon, he visited the office of Mr. Sylvan Hart, the charismatic mathematics tutor. Hart lounged in his chair in a manner that suggested confidence bordering on arrogance. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," Hart said, gesturing toward a chair. "Sit, sit. I imagine you are here about Victor." "Among other things," Poirot replied. "You consider him your protégé, I think." Hart smirked. "If one may call him that. He has the potential to be exceptional. Provided he learns that raw intellect is not enough, mathematics requires discipline of character as well as mind." Poirot considered the statement. Discipline is often the friend of ambition. Hart shrugged. "And sometimes its enemy. Victor, I think, fears being average more than he fears failure." Poirot tilted his head. "A curious distinction." Hart leaned forward. "You must understand, Victor has never been second in anything. If Clara wins, it will be the first time in his life that someone surpasses him in a field that matters. He may not handle such a humiliation gracefully. Poirot noted the phrasing "in a field that matters," which suggested Hart believed mathematics the only field worthy of distinction. Yet Poirot also observed another detail: Hart's desk drawer was locked, and not with the casual key of privacy, but with the determined key of protection. That was interesting. "Tell me," Poirot said casually, "how did Professor Harborough regard Victor?" Harborough was neutral, Hart replied with a trace of annoyance. "He said academic competition should not be treated as wars." "Ridiculous. If they are not wars, how else does one cultivate excellence?" Poirot's moustache twitched. "It sounds to me, monsieur, like you value victory more than virtue." Hart grinned. "Virtue is overrated. Excellence is what lasts." Poirot departed without further comment, but he left with a richer understanding of the school's competitive soul. St. Aurelius did not merely teach scholarship, it weaponized it. The missing letter. At dusk, Poirot returned to the library, where Inspector Mayberry was finishing the cataloguing of evidence. The envelope labeled Aurelius Fellowship, preliminary evaluation, had been opened and examined. Mayberry held up the folder. Harborough had nearly finished marking the final evaluations. But there's something odd. He references in his notes a letter to the Board of Trustees confirming his suggested winner. That letter is missing. Poirot felt a spark ignite behind his eyes. "Missing, you say? And when would such a letter have been delivered?" "Tomorrow morning," Mayberry replied. He clearly intended to submit it before the weekend. Then someone may have removed it either to conceal the winner or to prevent the submission. Mayberry nodded grimly. Clara and Victor would both have reasons to panic if they learned Harborough planned to recommend someone else. Poirot said nothing aloud, but inside his thoughts tightened around a hypothesis. He now suspected that the rivalry was not merely academic but existential, and that the victory itself was not the only prize. Reputation, dignity, family pride, financial survival, these were stakes powerful enough to motivate unthinkable acts. He left the library with Mayberry shortly after 7. As they walked, Poirot asked one final question. "Tell me, Inspector, does Professor Harborough drink tea with sugar?" "He does. Plenty of it." The librarian teased him about it. Poirot's gaze sharpened like a lens. "Then the poisoner is clever. They placed their venom not in the teapot but in the sugar bowl." Mayberry came to an abrupt halt. "That means that anyone who served him tea could have claimed innocence," Poirot finished. "For it is always the English habit that the guest adds his own sugar." Poirot paused as the last of the daylight drained from the courtyard. "In the end, Inspector, it is rarely the grand gesture that reveals the killer. It is the small habit, the tiny preference, the thing so ordinary it becomes invisible." He tapped his temple. "And invisible things are always the most dangerous." Chapter 5, Threads of Ambition. By the following morning, St. Aurelius had altered in a way that no amount of polished timetables or clipped instructions could conceal. The school continued its routines, bells rang, lessons began, essays were handed in, but everything was performed with the numb obedience of actors who had forgotten why the play was written in the first place. Hercule Poirot, with his unhurried step and keen gaze, moved through the corridors like a man reading a language only he fully understood. He saw the subtle changes, the way conversation stopped when a teacher entered, the glances exchanged when Professor Harborough's name was mentioned, the strained laughter in the common room that tried and failed to sound natural. Inspector Mayberry, who had spent the early hours coordinating with the local station, joined Poirot outside the dining hall. "We've confirmed the poison was mixed with sugar," Mayberry reported quietly. "The doctor found traces in the residue from the bowl. Enough to kill with 1 or 2 spoonfuls." Poirot nodded. "Then the weapon, it is not the teapot, but the habit. Anyone who knew the professor loved his tea very sweet could count on him to administer the poison to himself." Mayberry frowned. which means the list of suspects might be quite wide. Ah, but not so wide as that, Poirot replied. We must ask, who knew his habits intimately, who had cause to fear his decision, and who felt enough pressure that murder seemed less terrible than defeat? He glanced toward the staff room. To answer that, we must examine not only the pupils, but those who teach them. The staff room was a space of worn leather and strong coffee, with the faint smell of chalk clinging to the air. Poirot found several teachers gathered there, Madame Rousseau, Mr. Silverheart, an elderly Latin master named Mr. Pembroke, and Miss Stanley, a quiet but shrewd-looking history tutor. Conversation ceased when Poirot entered. Academic staff, for all their intellectual bravado, were as wary as any other group when a detective walked into the room. Please, Poirot said pleasantly, do not let me disturb you. It is better that I see you as you are, not as you wish to appear. This remark produced a strained chuckle from Mr. Pembroke. In that case, sir, you will see us tired, overburdened, and underappreciated. Madame Rousseau rolled her eyes with affectionate exasperation. Mr. Hart merely smirked. Poirot selected a small armchair and folded his hands on his lap. I wish to understand Professor Harborough as you knew him. A man is not killed for nothing. He stands in someone's way, or he holds a key that someone wishes to steal. Miss Stanley spoke first, her voice low. Julian was principled. Sometimes infuriatingly so. He refused to bend to convenience. If a student cheated, he reported it. If a colleague favored a particular pupil unfairly, he challenged it. Madame Rousseau nodded. He believed the fellowship should be awarded to the most deserving, regardless of background or influence. Mr. Hart's lips curled faintly. And that made him enemies, of course. Not everyone enjoys having their motives questioned. Poirot inclined his head. Among the candidates, Clara, Victor, and Leena, did he show any preference? The room shared a silence that had weight. It was Madame Rousseau who finally spoke. He discussed them with us, in confidence. He admired Clara's Polish, Victor's intellect, but he believed Leena's understanding of ethics and politics made her the best future representative of Saint Aurelius. Ah, Poirot murmured. So in his mind, the fellowship belonged to Mademoiselle Ashcroft. Miss Stanley added quietly, it was not a formal decision yet, but he was leaning strongly that way. He said the Academy needed to stand for merit, not legacy. Poirot's eyes flicked briefly to Mr. Hart. The maths tutor's expression did not change, but his fingers tightened around his coffee cup. Was this preference widely known? Poirot asked. Mr. Pembroke shook his head. Not officially. But news like that leaks. Teachers talk. Students overhear. It wouldn't surprise me if rumors reached the candidates. Poirot thanked them and rose, but as he turned to leave, Dr. Carrington himself entered the staff room. His face was paler than usual, the lines at his temples seemed deeper. Ah, Monsieur Poirot, Carrington said. I was hoping to find you. Might we speak privately? Poirot followed him back to the headmaster's office, that somber chamber of oak and paper where order struggled against chaos. Carrington closed the door and gestured for Poirot to sit. There's something I must tell you, the headmaster began, adjusting his spectacles. You may have already suspected some of it. Poirot said nothing, giving the man space. Yesterday morning, Carrington continued, Harborough and I met in this office. It was a short meeting, about 20 minutes, just before he went to the library. He wanted to discuss his recommendation for the fellowship. And he recommended Leena Ashcroft, Poirot said quietly. Carrington's shoulders sagged. Yes. He believed she best embodied the spirit of Saint Aurelius. Hard-working, principled, academically strong. But you were not entirely in agreement. Poirot suggested. Carrington hesitated. It isn't that I opposed her. I admire Leena greatly. But there are regulations. The fellowship requires an unbroken record of attendance during the final 2 academic years. Leena took an extended leave last year due to a serious family illness. Technically, this may make her ineligible. Poirot's eyes gleamed faintly. And you informed Harbour of this? I did, Carrington said. He was furious. He accused the board of caring more for appearances than for merit. He argued that exceptions should be made for exceptional circumstances. We left the matter unresolved. He said he would draft a letter to the trustees, urging them to ratify his choice regardless. The missing letter, Poirot murmured. Carrington blinked. You know of it. Inspector Maybury discovered that Harbour mentioned such a letter in his notes, but it has not been found, Poirot replied. If someone feared its contents. Carrington looked grim. Then they had every reason to silence him before it was sent. If Harbour's recommendation reached the board, it would not only elevate Leena, but expose any behind-the-scenes maneuvering on behalf of the other candidates. Poirot stood and approached the window. Outside, students moved between buildings, their coats buttoned against the autumn chill. To them, the fellowship remained a glowing possibility. To Poirot, it now resembled a lit fuse. You realize, headmaster, he said softly, that this information deepens the motive for more than one person. Those who supported Clara or Victor would have felt threatened. Leena herself, if she suspected that being chosen would only lead to public disgrace, might see Harbour's announcement as a double-edged sword. Carrington stared at him. You cannot believe Leena capable of such a deed. Poirot did not answer directly. In my experience, monsieur, good people are sometimes driven to terrible actions when placed in impossible positions. I do not accuse. I merely observe possibilities. Later that afternoon, Poirot sought Leena Ashcroft in the courtyard. He found her seated on a stone bench beneath one of the chestnut trees, a book open on her lap though she was not reading it. Her posture was still, her gaze distant. May I join you, mademoiselle? Poirot asked. Leena looked up quickly, then nodded. Yes, of course. Poirot sat, easing himself down with care. A few leaves drifted to the ground between them, crisp and bronze. You are troubled, he said gently. Everyone is, Leena replied. A professor is dead. The police are searching rooms. People are whispering. It would be strange not to be troubled. Poirot smiled faintly. That is true. Yet your trouble, I think, is of a more personal nature. Leena's fingers tightened on the edge of her book. You think I have something to hide? I think, Poirot said, that you have much to lose. That is not the same thing. Silence stretched, soft but charged. You work very hard, he continued. You have, as you say, no safety net. The fellowship is not merely an honor for you, it is a lifeline. University, career, financial stability, all tied to this one decision. Leena swallowed. You've spoken to Dr. Carrington? Yes. Then you know about my absence, she said quietly. My mother was very ill last year. I went home for several months. I thought I would never come back. She stared at the distant chimneys of the academy. When I returned, I promised myself I would make every sacrifice worth it. That all the extra hours, the missed sleep, the constant anxiety, would lead somewhere. And now you fear, Poirot said softly, that being chosen may expose a technicality that destroys everything instead. She looked at him sharply, eyes suddenly bright with unshed tears. Is that what will happen? Poirot did not lie, but neither did he offer unnecessary cruelty. It is possible. Bureaucracy is sometimes blind where it should see. Leena pressed her lips together. Harborough believed in fairness. He said once that rules should serve justice, not obstruct it. And yet, Poirot said, justice is often slow, while fear is very quick. He rose, tapping his umbrella lightly against the ground. Merci, mademoiselle. You have helped me more than you realize. As he walked away, Poirot's mind whirled quietly. The threads of ambition now stretched in all directions: Clara's pride, Victor's terror of mediocrity, Leena's desperate need for security, the teacher's divided loyalties, the headmaster's political anxieties. Each thread glistened under the light of motive. The question was which one had been pulled tight enough to choke a man's life away. Poirot suspected that the answer lay not only in who wanted to win, but in who most feared the consequences of victory. And fear, he knew, was a far sharper blade than ambition alone. Chapter 6: Red Herrings in the Study Hall. Inspector Mayberry believed in evidence, fingerprints, chemical residues, chronological logs, witness statements. Hercule Poirot believed in something much more elusive: the human heart. Between those two philosophies, the walls of St. Aurelius trembled like the shaky hands of a guilty man. By the third day after the murder, fear had permeated every corner of the academy, but fear did not settle equally. Some students feared police questions, others feared the scandal, a few feared each other. And among the candidates for the fellowship, fear and ambition now twisted together like strands of the same rope. The tea service. On a cool morning, Poirot and Inspector Mayberry returned to the upper library, this time not for the corpse but for the ritual. Poirot stood before the tea tray, tapping his finger on the porcelain sugar bowl with delicate impatience. The poison was in here, Mayberry said, so the one who brought the tray had opportunity. Opportunity, yes, Poirot murmured, but we must not confuse opportunity with guilt. It is a mistake the police make often. Mayberry raised an eyebrow. The student volunteer assigned to tea service that morning was Victor Graves. We confirmed it. Poirot nodded slowly. And Victor confirmed it as well. He is not a fool. If he had wished to commit the murder, would he not have attempted to obscure his proximity to the tea rather than affirm it so promptly? He is a boy who calculates. Mayberry frowned. You're suggesting someone else could have added the poison after Victor delivered the tray? Perhaps, Poirot said. Or before. The tea service routine is predictable, yes? And predictability is the murderer's dearest ally. The librarian, Mrs. Finchley, was summoned. She stood before them, hands clasped nervously. Mrs. Finchley, Poirot asked, does the tray sit anywhere before it is delivered? She nodded. On the sideboard in the staff anteroom. Sometimes for 5 minutes. Sometimes 10. Depends when the student arrives to fetch it. Poirot's moustache twitched. An unlocked sideboard, yes. Oh yes, she said. No reason to lock it. Only tea. Poirot exchanged a glance with the inspector. 5 to 10 minutes unattended in an unlocked room was enough time for half the school to poison the sugar bowl if they so wished. But Poirot had a more pointed question. And who usually takes tea with Professor Harborough? Mrs. Finchley blinked. Takes tea with him? Oh, no one. He prefers solitude. Says it keeps his mind sharp. Poirot bent to examine the tray again. 2 teacups. Curious, Poirot whispered. The invitation for company was made, but not accepted. Or perhaps expected, but not fulfilled. Mayberry frowned. 2 cups could simply mean the set is standard. Poirot shook his head. Ah, but the saucers are different. One is part of the regular academy set. The other, this one, is from the faculty lounge. Someone took the effort to mix and match. Someone who thought tea might be shared. But it was not. It was a small detail, almost absurd in its triviality, but Poirot felt it tug at the threads of motive. He straightened. "We must speak with the students again, indirectly." The study hall interrogations. Poirot did not interrogate. Poirot observed. He positioned himself in the study hall that afternoon, surrounded by students hunched over books, pens scratching, papers fluttering. There, without accusation, guilt often betrayed itself. Clara Denholm worked at a central table with immaculate posture, turning pages with the elegance of a pianist. Yet every so often her eyes lifted, not toward the window, but toward the clock on the wall. Impatience or worry? Poirot could not yet decide. Victor Graves occupied a corner table, notes spread like a general's battle plan. He solved equations at a speed bordering on manic, pencil tapping a furious rhythm. His foot bounced beneath the desk the way nervous men tap cigarettes they cannot smoke. Leena Ashcroft sat near the front, revising as though nothing mattered more than the next examination. She did not glance at the clock. She did not scan the room. She did not fidget. Her stillness was almost unnatural for a girl under suspicion. Poirot moved leisurely between tables, commenting on books and coursework with grandfatherly interest. He paused at Clara's table first. "You are taking notes on Rousseau," he said lightly. "The philosopher of politics, not your madam." Clara offered a thin smile. "Yes, sir. I find his ideas on civil liberty compelling." Poirot nodded. "And his views on hypocrisy, do they interest you?" Something flickered in her eyes. "I don't know what you mean, sir." "Oh, but I think you do," Poirot said, and moved on before she could reply. He reached Victor next. "You study with intensity, monsieur. Your pencil, it fears for its life." Victor did not smile. "Deadlines are coming. Being unprepared is worse than being wrong." Poirot nodded. "But being wrong, it is not fatal. Except perhaps in matters of poisoning." Victor's pencil froze mid-stroke. His knuckles whitened. Poirot left him with that silence, for silence was often more revealing than speech. Finally, Poirot approached Leena, who looked up with calm curiosity. "Your hand does not shake," Poirot said. "This is rare among the anxious. You have a strong mind." Leena exhaled. "I've had practice." "From hardship?" "Yes." "Hardship," Poirot said softly, "is sometimes the parent of either ambition or despair." Leena closed her notebook. "Which do you think applies to me?" Poirot gave a half smile. "I do not think. I observe. It is more reliable." Victor's error. Later that evening, as Poirot walked toward the dining hall, he encountered Victor Graves in the corridor. The boy startled upon seeing him. "Monsieur Poirot," Victor said hastily, "I wanted to ask, do the police think I did it?" Poirot paused. "Why should they?" Victor swallowed. "Because I brought the tea tray. Because it looks bad." Poirot raised a brow. "If it were merely appearance you feared, you would not tremble. One trembles only when worrying that appearance might reflect truth." Victor flushed. "I didn't poison him. I just did what I was assigned." Harbour drank the tea like he always did. "I didn't watch him, I didn't stay." Poirot's eyes flicked sharply. "Ah? But earlier you claimed you did not go to the library at all. Now you say you were present when the professor drank." Victor's face drained of colour. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then stammered, I meant only that I delivered the tray. I didn't stay after." Poirot stared at him silently, letting the contradiction choke the air between them. Victor fled down the corridor moments later, leaving a question floating like dust in his wake. Why had he changed his story? A dangerous gift. That night, as darkness settled over the campus, Madame Rousseau knocked at Poirot's door. She carried a small folder. "Monsieur," she whispered, "forgive the hour. But I found this in my pigeonhole after Harboroug's death. I do not know who placed it there." Poirot opened the folder. Inside were 2 essays, Leena's and Clara's, the same assignment. One was original. The other, copied line for line but written in a different hand. Madame Rousseau whispered, "Someone submitted a forged duplicate weeks ago. I believe Professor Harborough discovered who. And I believe that discovery may have been the trigger." Poirot did not speak. He only closed the folder gently. The motives had deepened. The rivalry had darkened. And now forgery, a sin of premeditation, had entered the game. Poirot extinguished the lamp. The Academy of Brilliance had become an academy of deceit. And somewhere within its walls walked a killer who feared the truth more than he feared beating Poirot's little grey cells. Chapter 7: The Final Puzzle. The next morning dawned cold and grey, with a mist that clung to the courtyard like a veil of secrecy. St. Aurelius was quieter than usual, no shouts of younger pupils, no chatter from the sixth formers, no confident footsteps of scholars. Fear had softened everything. Even the bell rang timidly. Hercule Poirot took breakfast alone in the guest dining room. He buttered his toast with mathematical precision, though his mind travelled far from the table before him. He replayed each interview, each expression, each contradiction. There were many threads, but one thread, he sensed, was beginning to tighten around the truth. At precisely 9 o'clock, Inspector Mayberry entered. "We discovered something new," he said, closing the door behind him. The sugar bowl used by Harborough was cleaned recently. Too recently. The polish was fresh. Only one student had access to the cleaning supplies yesterday morning, Victor Graves. Poirot dabbed his mouth with his napkin. "So we have another fact that incriminates our young mathematician." "Indeed," Mayberry replied. "But I confess, Monsieur Poirot, Victor's terror seems too raw to be guilt. He seems frightened of being suspected, not of being caught." Poirot nodded. "Fear, Inspector, is a language. Some lie with anger, some with calm, some with silence. Victor lies with panic. But panic is not proof." Mayberry sighed. "Then what are we missing?" Poirot rose gently from his chair. "Not what, Inspector?" "Who?" "A gathering of shadows." By mid-morning, students were summoned to the small auditorium, ostensibly for a general announcement from the headmaster. But the real purpose was subtler. Poirot wished to observe Clara, Victor, and Leena in a single space, to see how they watched each other, how they breathed, how they stiffened when certain names were spoken. The room seemed to vibrate with suppressed tension. Clara sat with statuesque elegance, but her jaw clenched occasionally, the only sign of strain. Victor hunched over, fingers gripping his pencil so tightly that Poirot feared it might snap. Leena sat alone, hands folded neatly, her face serene yet hollowed by a sleepless night. Poirot stepped onto the stage. "Miss Amos," he began, his voice gentle but firm, "I ask for your patience. A man has died. And though the police investigate the physical evidence, it is the psychology, the hidden truth, that interests me." A ripple moved through the students like wind through leaves. Poirot continued, "3 of you had your futures placed into the hands of Professor Harborough. 3 of you stood to gain or lose much by his decision. And 3 of you carry secrets." Clara's back straightened instinctively. Victor's leg bounced faster. Leena folded her hands more tightly. Poirot paused, letting silence thicken. "A forged essay was discovered," he said. "One student's work copied, another substituted. Professor Harborough knew of this deception." Clara's face drained of color. "And it is this knowledge, I believe, that placed him in danger. A murmur spread. Clara looked as though she might faint. Poirot raised a hand. "I do not accuse." "Not yet." For the plagiarist and the murderer may not be the same. Victor exhaled shakily, realizing the accusation might shift. Poirot's gaze moved from face to face, reading each flicker of reaction. "There is also," he continued, "the missing letter, Harbour's recommendation to the trustees. Its contents would have revealed the winner of the fellowship." Leena looked down sharply. Clara's lips parted in shock. Victor stiffened. Poirot finished. Someone wanted that letter hidden. And someone wanted Harbour silent. A slip in the web. When the assembly ended, Poirot requested the 3 candidates remain behind. Dr. Carrington and Inspector Maybury stood at the side of the hall, tense. Poirot placed a single object on the table before them, the sugar bowl. "Let us speak plainly," he said. "The poisoner tampered with this, knowing Harbour sweetens his tea generously." Victor whispered, "I didn't put anything in it." "And yet you cleaned it," Poirot said softly. Victor froze. Clara looked horrified. Leena's eyes widened. I didn't clean it," Victor stammered. "I wiped the tray because Mrs. Finchley asked me to." "That's it." Poirot stepped closer. "You are lying again, mon garçon. But this time, it is not the lie of a murderer. It is the lie of someone terrified of consequence." Victor's breath hitched. He opened his mouth to defend himself. And then Clara spoke. Victor had no access to the sugar bowl, she cried suddenly. He fetched the tray after it had been set out. The bowl would have been prepared earlier by whoever supervised the faculty lounge. Poirot's eyes flashed. "Ah. So you know when the tray was prepared." Clara froze. It was a small slip, tiny, almost invisible, but Poirot saw it clearly. "How, mademoiselle?" Poirot asked calmly. "Do you know the timing of the tray if you were in French class all morning?" Clara's lips trembled. I saw it earlier. When I went to fetch the dictionary." Poirot shook his head gently. "The dictionary shelf is not near the faculty anteroom. You would not have passed it." Clara's composure shattered. "All right. I walked past the lounge. But that does not mean." "It means," Poirot interrupted, "you saw the tray. And you knew Harbour's routine. And you had your own scandal to protect." Clara's breathing quickened. But Poirot raised a hand. "And yet, you are not the murderer." Clara stared, stunned. Victor sagged in relief. Leena simply watched. Poirot stepped back. "No, Clara Denholm. You plagiarized, yes. You forged a duplicate essay, yes. But you are too proud to kill with poison. You choose your weapons differently, words, appearances, reputation. Murder would be beneath your style." Clara burst into tears, not of guilt, but of humiliation. Victor placed a shaky hand to his forehead. Leena remained still. Poirot turned to face her. "There is one person," he said softly, "who knew Harbour's habits intimately. Who feared his decision more than either of you. Who stood to lose not the prize, but everything." Leena's lips parted. Poirot's voice lowered. "The letter naming you the winner would not save you, it would expose you. It would make public the one secret you feared more than failure, your ineligibility." Leena whispered, "No." "And so," Poirot continued gently, "you sought to delay the announcement. Not to kill, but to make Harbour ill, to buy time. A desperate attempt, born from fear, not malice." Her breath hitched. "But you misjudged the dosage. And turned a temporary ailment into death." The hall fell into absolute silence. Leena covered her mouth with trembling hands. Tears welled in her eyes. I didn't mean to, she choked. I swear I didn't mean to kill him. I only wanted him to postpone the decision. I just needed time. Inspector Mayberry stepped forward slowly. Poirot closed his eyes briefly, not in triumph, but in sorrow. Mademoiselle, he said softly, the path to tragedy is often paved with the smallest of desperate steps. Leena sank into a chair, sobbing quietly. Outside, the cold grey morning brightened faintly, as if the clouds themselves released a long-held breath. The truth had finally come into the light. Chapter 8. Poirot ties the knot. The aftermath of confession was not the loud and dramatic spectacle that novels often promised. In reality, it was quiet, painfully quiet, with the sound of muffled sobbing and the shuffling of official papers far more haunting than any shout of outrage. Inspector Mayberry took Leena Ashcroft into custody gently, as one might handle a delicate instrument rather than a criminal. There were no handcuffs. There was no declaration of arrest. Only the solemn murmur. Leena Ashcroft, I am placing you under detainment for questioning regarding the death of Professor Julian Harborough. The girl nodded without resistance, unable to form the words to acknowledge him. She was led away down the corridor, her shoulders trembling beneath the crisp academy blazer. Students who glimpsed her from afar whispered in confusion, not certainty, for rumors had only just begun their journey. Poirot watched her departure without triumph. His moustache did not twitch. His eyes did not gleam. This was not a victory. It was a conclusion, and a bitter one. Repercussions and realizations. Dr. Carrington stood near the stage, pale as chalk. His hands gripped the back of a chair for support. I cannot believe it, he murmured. Leena Ashcroft. Of all of them. Poirot responded softly, you believed ambition belonged only to the privileged. But you forget, monsieur, the poor do not have the luxury of ambition. They have the necessity. More dangerous by far. Clara Denholm, cheeks streaked with tears, approached hesitantly. Monsieur Poirot. I didn't think her voice broke. All this time, I thought it would be Victor who. Poirot cut her off, not unkindly. You thought the murderer would be the one who threatened you. Yet life is rarely so symmetrical. Victor threatened your pride, mademoiselle. Leena feared the collapse of her entire world. Clara's lips quivered. But she had options. She could have appealed. She could have. Poirot raised a hand. Could she? Consider her circumstances. A mother ill. A family dependent on her future. A scholarship as her only path. In her mind, the fellowship was not a medal but a lifeline. And when one believes survival depends upon a single choice, the moral scales tip with ease. Clara's perfection crumpled. She turned away without another word. Victor Graves lingered near the doorway, his expression unreadable. When the others had gone, he approached Poirot. Did you know from the beginning? Victor asked. Poirot smiled faintly. None. I knew only that the murderer was not the one who seemed most blatant. When a crime appears mathematical, the solution is often poetic. When it appears poetic, the solution is often pragmatic. Victor shook his head with a mirthless smile. I don't understand what that means. Poirot leaned closer. It means that murder is not committed by archetypes, monsieur. It is committed by frightened people. Victor stared at him a moment, absorbing more than he wished to. Then he asked in a lower voice, and what happens to the fellowship now? Poirot exhaled. That, mon garçon, is the least important matter today. But I imagine the board will suspend it. Victor nodded slowly, shoulders sinking as though he had lost a battle that was never his to win. The letter is found. The next day, while inspectors examined Harbour's office, a constable discovered a narrow envelope wedged beneath a row of books, a letter bearing Harbour's handwriting. Inspector Mayberry brought it to Poirot immediately. "You were right," he said. "It's the recommendation to the trustees." Poirot opened it with solemn care, as though handling a relic. Inside, the writing was clean and unambiguous. Harbour recommended Leena Ashcroft as the fellowship recipient, citing academic merit, ethical reasoning, and maturity beyond her peers. The final paragraph, however, captured the tragedy perfectly. If we claim to uphold merit as our guiding principle, then we must honour merit wherever it appears, even where it is least expected. To deny Miss Ashcroft the fellowship on a bureaucratic technicality would be a disservice to our mission and to justice itself. Poirot folded the letter slowly. Had this been delivered in time, he whispered, Harbour's champion might yet have triumphed without resorting to desperation. Inspector Mayberry grimaced. "And now?" "Now," Poirot replied, "justice will come in its crude legal form. But moral justice, that is more complicated. The fate of Leena Ashcroft." 3 days later, Mayberry informed Poirot of the final ruling from the Crown Prosecution Service. Leena would not be charged with murder, but with manslaughter. The court accepted that her intent was not to kill but to incapacitate. Her sentencing would consider her age, circumstances, and lack of malice. The news travelled quietly through the Academy. No one celebrated. Even students who had resented her could not muster triumph. The scandal had been too sobering, too real, too close. Leena's mother arrived to collect her. When she embraced her daughter outside the Academy gates, the sight broke even the stoniest expressions among faculty. For in that moment, it became clear that victory had not been the prize at St. Aurelius, survival had. Poirot's departure. On the final afternoon of his stay, Poirot prepared to leave the Academy. His suitcase sat neatly closed. His umbrella leaned against the desk. Outside, the first hints of winter tickled the air, and students walked more briskly toward their lessons. Dr. Carrington entered the room, removing his hat respectfully. "I wanted to thank you, Monsieur Poirot. Not only for solving the matter, but for restoring a sense of truth to this place." Poirot regarded him with a steady gaze. Truth, headmaster, was not restored. It was revealed. Whether the Academy chooses to learn from it or bury it beneath future honours, that remains to be seen. Carrington nodded, chastened. "I have suspended the Aurelius Fellowship for the year. And privately, I intend to revise our review protocol. We must ensure hardship is not punished as weakness." Poirot allowed himself a small smile. "Then Harbour will not have died entirely in vain." Carrington bowed his head. Poirot collected his umbrella. As he stepped outside, Inspector Mayberry waited near the gate. "I must say," Mayberry remarked, "I expected a grand conspiracy. Poisonings at elite academies seemed like fertile ground." Poirot chuckled softly. "Conspiracies are the luxury of the powerful, Inspector." "But murder?" "Murder is often committed by those who believe they have no other choices." He paused at the gate and gazed back at the Academy, a fortress of knowledge, ambition, privilege, and fragile dreams. "Remember this, mon ami," Poirot said quietly. "Where the prize is great, the suffering of those who pursue it is greater still." With that, he tipped his hat, stepped through the gate, and began his walk toward the train station, leaving St. Aurelius behind, wiser, chastened, and forever marked by the affair of the scholars' feud.